Key message on Brexit, wow. That we've got to avoid being dragged into a constant culture war, which is ripping apart the social fabric of this country, when the real division in society is between not how we voted on one sunny day 3.5 years ago, but about those at the top of society who have thrown this country into turmoil and expected the majority to pick up the tab for it. And we can't understand the turmoil we're in without going back to that basic fact. And whatever we do from here on in, we've got to try and bridge that divide and end the culture war. That we ended up with this situation because of partly a government of the Tories and Lib Dems which forced the majority to pay for a crash caused by the bankers, and that caused mass disillusionment that fed into why many people voted in the way they did, as they saw it against the status quo that was rigged against them. And that, yeah, now I think for me the only way personally of ending the deadlock is another referendum, even though I've long had problems and fears with it because of the divisions that were brought to the fore, to say the least, by the first referendum. But we've got to find, anything we do from now on is going to be difficult and bad and hard, and everyone just has to choose their bad option, and that's my bad option, and hopefully try and pivot back to issues like poverty, jobs, the NHS, tax, austerity, public ownership, the climate emergency, racism, the things we should be talking about. Well, in practice, whatever happens, the vast majority of the Labour Party would back Remain. That's very clear. Whether it be Jeremy Corbyn's two closest parliamentary allies, John McDonnell, Dan Abbott, to those more in the centre of the party, and the grassroots overwhelmingly would campaign for Remain. So for me, I find that kind of argument a bit of a hypothetical. I think for me though, there's a lot of pressure on Jeremy Corbyn himself to personally commit to supporting Remain, and I suppose the issues I have with that is if we look back at the last 3.5 years and the culture war that I mentioned, basically one of the problems has been that the Tory Brexiteers behave like winner-takes-all conquering armies, where, Remainers, 48%, were left to think not only do you have no say in the future of your country anymore, but you're going to be belittled and humiliated as enemies of the people, traitors, saboteurs, citizens of nowhere. And that's understandably led to massive bitterness. And what I'd say is, if there's another referendum and Remain wins, and that's the outcome people like myself support Remain and reform, Remain and rebel, is lots of Leave supporters will feel very aggrieved and angry. And if we flip what's happened in this situation as winner-takes-all conquering army, nothing will ever be solved. So I do think the idea of a Prime Minister that steps back and doesn't act like they're leading some, conquering army on behalf of one side of the Brexit debate is quite healthy to heal the wounds, the divisions that have opened up in this country. Well, what Labour has to do is offer an inspiring, coherent vision that builds on what was offered in 2017, which broke a consensus in this country that there is no alternative consensus, in which people have had to be resigned to market fundamentalism and society being rigged in favour of the rich. And they broke that spell in 2017 and now have to build on it with a mass movement, which is what the Labour Party is uniquely positioned to offer, which can deliver a message of hope and optimism when an election is finally called, which is going to be very soon in all likelihood. So I think the critical thing now is, to offer compelling, inspiring answers to everything from the housing crisis to austerity to the climate emergency, which is galvanising so many people on the streets of this country and countries across the world. So I think, just trying to pivot back to those inspiring messages. We can't just allow this to be the Brexit election. It has to be an election about the injustices that led to this turmoil in the first place. And if we don't have an election that answers that, then the turmoil we've already seen in this country is just, I'm afraid, a weak foreshadow of far worse to come. And I don't think that's probably what any of us, apart from the charlatans and shysters amongst the powerful, who've whipped up this culture war and in an attempt to profit from it. Well, famously in 1992, when Labour lost an election many thought they'd win, the Sun plastered on their front page, it was the Sun what won it. And there was this idea that a lot of the left often resigned themselves to, of basically the media, the kingmakers, and that's it. And I think the 2017 election disproved that, because it was a hysterical campaign against the Labour Party. They had very few media sympathisers whatsoever. And, it was all kind of terrorist supporters, hate their own country, extreme, they're going to nationalise your mum. Yeah, and I just think, that obviously didn't work, in the sense that, Labour was supposed to suffer electoral oblivion, and instead they deprived the Tories of the majority, as is people constantly remind they didn't win, but they got the biggest increase in their share since 1945, and they suffered a terrible defeat in 2015, a historic defeat in which they lost one of their heartlands, Scotland. So the idea they could just jump in 2 years from a terrible defeat to suddenly resounding victory was always, I think, a little bit far-fetched. But they did offer, they broke, I think it broke the power of the media, and I think also because of social media now, what you saw in the election was videos by Momentum, for example, reached, is estimated, a quarter of the population, and in many key target seats even more than that, like 40% of voters. So it just shows now that with new technology and so on, and also with a mass grassroots movement, because Labour now isn't a shriveled up kind of husk like the Conservatives are, and they've got a mass membership that can take its message and speak to people one-on-one in a way that bypasses a lot of the media hostility. So I think there's a lot of hope there. Well, first past the post makes that very difficult, because for me, to be honest, I think the only other party with parliamentary representation which really reaches that threshold is the Green Party, which has an MP here in Brighton. I wouldn't regard the Liberal Democrats myself as a left party, and nor would I regard the SNP or even Plaid Cymru, they're nationalist parties which are kind of broad, they have a left in them, they also have a right in them. Their unifying goal is independence. So I have a huge amount of respect and time for Caroline Lucas. I think she'd be a really good Secretary of State for the climate emergency. So in that sense, I think that's one, that could be a very bold thing Labour could do after an election. But realistically, given first past the post, the Greens don't really have any chance of really winning any seats realistically without upsetting Greens. I mean, just looking at the electoral map. And that's because of a silly electoral system, which they're right to feel aggrieved about. But we are where we are. So I think definitely, working with the Greens on an issue-by-issue basis is very important, where there's a lot of agreement, and I think Labour should be open to the idea of Caroline Lucas serving in a future government.
Brilliant. Owen Jones, thank you.
Thank you, no worries.